When my dad married Valerie, I had just turned 11. My mom, Lisa, had passed away 13 months earlier. It was melanoma, the aggressive kind that doesn't care how hard you pray or how many treatments you can afford. One day she had a migraine, and 82 days later, I was standing in Rose Hill Cemetery in a black dress that still had the tag attached, clutching a funeral program with trembling fingers. Exactly 1 year after her death, Dad brought Valerie into our lives. She was his firm's top client engagement director, and she carried herself like she belonged on the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Platinum blonde hair, pearl pink lipstick that never smudged heels that clicked across marble floors like they owned the world. Valerie wore heels to backyard cookouts. She didn't bend, she posed, and she made my dad feel alive again. "She makes me happy, Jess," Dad said to me in the kitchen, his voice soft, but with that don't argue undertone. "I need you to try." So I tried. I helped her carry in her boutique handbags and stack her designer shoes inside the closet that used to hold Mom's garden boots. I said nothing when our oak-framed family photos disappeared and were replaced with minimalist art from Scandinavian catalogs. I kept quiet when the backyard vegetable beds Mom had built by hand were bulldozed and replaced with a sand-colored stone patio, where Valerie now meditated with scented oils and herbal tea. For 3 years I smiled. I wore the pastel dresses Valerie bought me to her fundraisers and posed for photos next to her as if we were close. I stood tall when her friends complimented her on how well I'd turned out despite the tragedy. I got straight A's. I used my SAT prep flashcards at dinner. I laughed politely at Valerie's jokes even when they weren't funny. My dad didn't seem to notice that I'd stopped laughing for real. He was too busy planning Napa Valley getaways and networking mixers with Valerie's elite friends. At night, I curled up under Mom's old fleece sweater, the one that still faintly smelled like lavender and pine mulch. I cried into it in silence, hoping it would keep me anchored in a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. Valerie made gestures, lavish ones often wrapped in glossy paper with expensive bows. For my birthdays, she gave me luxury makeup sets I never used and handbags I was too embarrassed to carry. The gifts weren't for me, they were what she thought a daughter should like. They were signals to her social circle. She hosted elegant wine and cheese parties and introduced me to hedge fund executives and their wives as our girl. The emphasis heavy on our, even though her hand never once reached for mine during the introductions. She even opened a college fund for me publicly, of course. There was an announcement at her women's business brunch where I was made to stand beside her as she shared how family always comes first. But when I got my first period, it wasn't Valerie who helped me. It wasn't even Dad. It was a WebMD article I found on my phone while locked in the bathroom wrapped in panic. When I woke up crying from dreams of my mother fading into shadows, it was our golden retriever Charlie who nudged my face and licked my tears away. Then came sophomore year, the year everything changed. I'd auditioned on a whim for the school play and landed the lead. For the first time since Mom's death, I felt like me again, alive, seen. I poured myself into rehearsals, stayed late after school, and memorized lines by flashlight under the covers at night. Opening night fell on a Friday in May, and I had invited Dad weeks in advance. He said he was proud of me. He even promised to bring flowers. But 3 days before the curtain was to rise, Valerie called a family meeting in the den. You'll need to miss your play, she said, eyes glued to her tablet. The Reed's Charity Gala is that night. Senator McCarthy is attending and they're bringing their son Ethan. He's pre-law at Stanford. My dad opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again when Valerie gently touched his wrist. It's just a high school play, she said with a forced smile. There will be others. There won't be another first performance, I muttered. Jess, Dad said carefully, this could be important for your future. I didn't argue. I went upstairs, locked my door, and pulled out the antique keepsake box Mom had left for me. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper yellowed with age, were 3 things: her engagement ring, a baby lock of my hair, and a journal I had never dared open until that night. That night, alone in my room and unable to breathe past the lump in my throat, I finally opened my mother's journal. It was handwritten in neat, flowing cursive, dated carefully at the top of each page. The early entries were what I expected: memories of my childhood, thoughts about how much she loved me, small advice about friendships and school dances, recipes she'd never had time to teach me. But the last entry was different. It was dated 2 weeks before she passed. The ink looked rushed, the words a little slanted, as if she'd written them in pain. If you're reading this, Jess, it began then. I'm gone and you're old enough to know the truth. There's a safe deposit box. The key is taped inside this journal's back cover. What you find there will change everything. I'm so sorry. I tore open the back flap and found it small silver, etched with the name of a local bank, downtown Redwood Union Savings. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I feigned illness and skipped school. I took the city bus to the bank, the key burning in my pocket. The branch manager, an older man with kind eyes, recognized my name. "Your mother told us you might come someday," he said softly, leading me to a quiet vault at the back of the building. Inside the safe deposit box was a USB drive, several folders of printed documents, and an envelope with my name in Mom's handwriting. "My dearest Jess," the letter began. "By now Valerie has likely become a fixture in your life. I've known about her for a long time." I stopped reading and blinked, the room tilting slightly. My mom had known. She'd discovered the affair, Dad and Valerie, 6 months before her diagnosis. She had hired a private investigator. And she had proof. Hotel receipts, photographs, cell phone screenshots, messages that made me nauseous. "She's taking Jess to her piano recital. I'll come over after." I wish she'd just go away. The last one was from my father, sent 4 months before Mom even got sick. I flipped through credit card records showing dinners and gifts never meant for Mom. And then I found something far worse. Financial documents. Ledgers showing that over the course of several years, my father and Valerie had been transferring money, millions, from Mom's family trust into offshore accounts. The trust had been built over generations by Mom's side of the family. She was supposed to pass it down to me. Instead, they were draining it, quietly, ruthlessly. My hands trembled as I reached the final folder: medical reports, blood work, hair analysis, lab results, all showing toxic metals in her system consistent with long-term exposure. It was in that cold, dim room beneath fluorescent lights and silent cameras that the last remnants of my childhood cracked like glass. I sat in the bank's private conference room for nearly 3 hours. At first I was overwhelmed, numb even. But as I reread the files again and again, something inside me shifted. The fear, the grief, the confusion, it all sharpened into something new. Focus. I didn't run out of the building in tears. I didn't call the police. I didn't scream at my father. Instead, I walked out of Redwood Union with a fire in my chest and a silent promise on my lips: you won't get away with this. Over the next 2 years, I became exactly what Valerie had always pretended. I was the perfect daughter. I played the role flawlessly. I kept my grades immaculate. I joined every extracurricular she recommended. I attended every corporate mixer gala and benefit dinner with a dazzling smile and practiced poise. Behind the scenes, I became something else entirely. Every night, my room became a command center. I built spreadsheets. I tracked account movements. I studied the documentation in the USB drive until I could recite the paper trails by memory. I bought a hidden safe and tucked it behind my bookshelf, filled it with printed evidence backup drives and notes scribbled late into the night. I started recording casual conversations at dinner when Dad mentioned new clients. I quietly took pictures of his documents left on the kitchen island. I documented everything down to the tone of Valerie's voice when she answered mysterious phone calls after midnight. 6 months after finding Mom's letter, I contacted the people mentioned in the envelope, 3 individuals she had trusted more than anyone else. A forensic accountant named Martin Blake, a financial crime attorney named Susan Adler, and a retired judge, Peter Monroe, who had once served on the board of my grandfather's firm. I told my dad I was at a Model UN retreat. In reality, I was sitting in Judge Monroe's oak-paneled study, sharing every file I had assembled. Susan muttered a curse under her breath as she flipped through the pages. Martin closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. The judge said nothing at first, then he looked me dead in the eye. "Your mother," he said, his voice tight, "was the most principled person I ever knew." He paused, then asked, "What do you want to do, Jess?" I had thought about that question every night for 6 months. "I don't want revenge," I said slowly. "I want preparation. I want to take back what's mine the right way." The judge nodded once firmly. "Your mother thought you'd say that. She left instructions for this very scenario." And just like that, I was no longer alone. For the next 18 months, I led a double life. By day, I was the shining example of teen perfection. I aced my classes, joined the National Honor Society, and became co-president of the Student Council. Valerie beamed with pride, showing off my achievements like trophies she had personally earned. "My Jess is going places," she'd declare to her country club friends, as if she had anything to do with the grit fueling my ambition. By night and 3 evenings each week, I trained. Judge Monroe's study became my war room. Martin taught me how to unravel complex financial statements, identify layered transactions, and trace money through dummy corporations. Susan educated me on trust law, corporate governance, and the legal landmines my parents had danced around. They were relentless but patient. Every new skill was another weapon in my arsenal. The goal wasn't just to understand what had been done, it was to prepare for exactly how to take it all back. Meanwhile, I continued documenting. Every client Valerie mentioned over brunch I traced. Every anonymous donation she claimed credit for, I investigated. Every shift in Dad's business dealings I mapped. By the time I turned 16, I had my own database with over 100 pages of cross-referenced material growing more detailed each week. What they didn't know was that while they were bragging about my early Yale acceptance, I was also taking advanced online finance and law courses under a pseudonym. I wasn't just building a case, I was building a foundation to run the company when the time came. Dad praised me constantly. "You're everything your mother would have wanted," he once said, mistaking my silence for humility. He had no idea how right he was. The summer before I was set to leave for Yale, Valerie pulled me aside during lunch at a boutique cafe in Beacon Hill. She had ordered her usual dry salad and Pellegrino and looked over her sunglasses at me with a practiced expression of maternal concern. "You're my daughter in every way that matters," she said, her voice soft and carefully pitched. "Let's make it official. I want to adopt you before college starts." I stared at her, searching for something real in her face. There was nothing there, just calculation. This wasn't love. This was about security. An adopted daughter meant a stronger legal claim should anything happen to Dad. It meant control. I smiled, playing my part. "That would mean so much to me," I said, then reached across the table and took her hand. "Let's do it." That night, I called an emergency meeting with Judge Monroe and the team. The adoption request changed everything. It triggered financial disclosures, which meant an even deeper look at their assets. And if we timed it right, we could use the process to expose the remaining 30% of the missing trust funds. "How close are we?" I asked Martin. "We've traced 72% of the diverted assets," he said. "Enough for prosecution." "Then it's time," I said. 2 weeks later, it was Mother's Day. Valerie had planned a lavish garden brunch in our backyard now. A sterile expanse of trimmed hedges, imported peonies, and minimalist white furniture that had long replaced Mom's tangled roses and sunflower beds. She'd invited over 30 of her closest friends, most of whom had never once asked me about my real mother. This year's gathering had a special twist. Valerie intended to make a public announcement about the adoption. She had hired a professional photographer, a jazz trio, and even ordered personalized champagne flutes etched with "Family First." She was staging a fairy tale. I was about to rewrite it. For the week leading up to the party, I stayed up late compiling what would become the most elaborate gift I'd ever given. It wasn't wrapped in ribbon, but in justice. It was a custom-bound presentation, leather cover, gold-embossed title, "A Daughter's Gratitude." Inside, evidence chaptered like a memoir. Each page built toward the truth Mom had uncovered before she died. Financial charts annotated in my handwriting, transaction trails, legal summaries, photos, quotes from Mom's final letter, all neatly packaged for maximum psychological impact. The morning of the party, I found Valerie in her dressing room fretting over which cream-tone designer dress to wear. "Which one?" she asked, holding up two almost identical gowns, Chanel and Oscar de la Renta. "The Chanel," I said without hesitation. She nodded approvingly and laid the other one aside. "I have something for you," I said, placing a box wrapped in silver and navy paper into her hands. "Oh," she gasped lightly. "Jess, you didn't have to." I smiled. I wanted to, especially for today. She reached to place it with the rest of the unopened gifts. "I'd prefer you open it now," I said softly but firmly. "It's personal." Something in my tone made her hesitate. She peeled back the wrapping slowly and lifted the leather book with curiosity. "A Daughter's Gratitude," she read aloud, visibly moved. "Oh, sweetheart." She opened to the first page, a picture of my mom glowing and carefree in our garden before the illness. Valerie blinked, confused. "What is this?" "Keep going," I said. The next pages were documents, receipts, wire transfers, annotated evidence of years of deceit. Her manicured fingers trembled. Her smile faltered. Confusion turned to horror as she flipped page after page, each more damning than the last. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, messages between her and my father, notes linking financial crimes to their manipulation of the trust. This is absurd," she whispered. "But accurate," I replied, perched casually on the edge of her vanity. Then came the final chapter, the outline of the legal action underway. Dates, contacts, court filings in preparation, a scheduled meeting with federal investigators. You might find Chapter 3 especially interesting, I added, my voice steady. She glanced down and froze. The page displayed text exchanges from when Mom was in hospice, complaints about hospital visiting hours ruining dinner reservations. She looked up at me, pale and breathless. "What do you want?" "Simple," I said. "You're going to host your party smile for the guests. And then tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you and Dad will meet me and Judge Monroe to discuss how this ends." The party lasted just under 4 hours. Valerie kept her composure barely as she smiled through every photo op and accepted compliments on her mother-daughter bond. I stood beside her, radiating poise and grace, the perfect daughter she wanted to display. When Mr. Clark from Dad's firm approached us near the mimosa bar, he chuckled and said, "Jessica, your mom must be over the moon about Yale." "She's thrilled," I said, catching Valerie's eye. "She's always been so supportive." Valerie clenched her flute tighter. "At one point, I toasted her publicly. To Valerie, the woman who's taught me so much about loyalty and the importance of consequences." She flinched. I smiled wider. Only we understood the double meanings. My father arrived late, texting to say golf had run over. That was fine. His own copy of my gift was waiting in his study, complete with a few tailored additions. The kind that turned suspicion into evidence and suggestions into federal charges. After the last guest left, Valerie disappeared upstairs. I waited. 30 minutes later, I found her in her walk-in closet, clutching her Cartier jewelry case and frantically packing it into a suitcase. "Going somewhere?" I asked from the doorway. She froze. "You can't prove any of it. It's hearsay, circumstantial." "SEC doesn't agree, neither does the FBI." That was a bluff, but she didn't know it yet. She slumped onto the bench at the foot of her bed, still clutching a handful of bracelets. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for Dad, then we talk." He came home an hour later, loosening his tie as he walked in. "How was the party?" he asked casually. "She's upstairs," I replied, handing him the identical leather-bound dossier. "But maybe open this first." He sat on the living room couch and flipped through it. He didn't speak, just turned the pages, slowly, intently. His lawyer instincts kicked in. When he finished, he looked up at me, face drained of all color. "Where did you get this?" "Mom left it for me, along with instructions." He inhaled sharply but said nothing. "Whatever you think you know is backed up, triplicated, and distributed across 5 encrypted servers." Silence. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "The same thing I told Valerie. 9:00 a.m., Judge Monroe's office. We'll discuss terms." That night I found Valerie again alone, sitting on a garden chair where Mom's tulips once grew. She wasn't crying, she was just hollow. "Why now?" she asked without turning. "Why wait this long?" I sat beside her because Mom taught me patience, and I needed to understand everything first. She turned to me. "What do you want, Jessica?" I didn't hesitate. Control of the company, restoration of the trust, public resignations, no criminal proceedings as long as you cooperate. That's the offer. She laughed bitterly. "You're 16. I'm 17 in 2 weeks. And I have a full legal team, the original trustees, and training from experts you never saw coming." Just then her phone buzzed. She looked down. "A message from Dad. She knows everything." She looked up at me with wide eyes. I stood adjusting the pearl necklace Mom had left me. "See you both tomorrow." The next morning, I dressed in the same navy blue suit Mom had bought me for my first academic competition. Pearl studs, soft bun, neutral lipstick. I looked 10 years older and felt it. Downstairs, Dad sat at the kitchen island still wearing yesterday's rumpled slacks. His tie hung loose around his neck, and a cup of untouched black coffee steamed in front of him. "Where's Valerie?" I asked, though I already knew. "Gone," he said without looking up. "Took the Lexus and a suitcase, left her phone behind." I nodded, not surprised. That complicates things, but it doesn't change the outcome. She was never the primary stakeholder. He met my gaze for the first time. "You look like Catherine did, when she was fighting." The words pierced deeper than I expected. I didn't respond. "We should go. Judge Monroe doesn't tolerate lateness." The meeting at the judge's chambers was silent at first, almost solemn. Dad said nothing as he sat across the mahogany table from me, flanked by my team, Ms. Barrow, the attorney, Dr. Shields, the forensic accountant, and Judge Monroe himself, calm but resolute. Document after document was placed before him. Power of attorney, voting rights transfer, resignation from the board, acknowledgement of the trust's ownership clauses. He initialed, he signed, each page chipped away at his authority, his control, and his legacy. When he hesitated, the judge gently reminded, "These terms are conditional. Obstruct the recovery process or attempt to conceal assets, and we file the federal complaints immediately." Dad nodded, hollowed out. At the end, Monroe slid one last page forward. "This states that all contact with Jessica is to go through my office or the trust until she turns 18. No direct communication." Dad stiffened. "That's my daughter. You can't." "You can refuse," I interrupted calmly. "But if you do, I'll release the toxicology findings to law enforcement. Let the state decide whether it's just financial crimes we're dealing with." His hand trembled slightly as he signed. I passed him the same Mont Blanc pen that had once belonged to my grandfather, the one Mom used when she signed the acquisition that made the firm hers, the one she left for me. As he set it down, his shoulders sagged. "Can I at least explain?" he asked, eyes lowered. I shook my head. "I've read your justifications already, your emails to Valerie, the performance evaluations you wrote to keep me off the board, the memos to investors plotting my symbolic leadership without any real power. I understand exactly how you operate." Judge Monroe ended the session there, calling in a car to take Dad to the temporary residence we'd arranged. He'd be permitted to return home in 5 days to collect personal belongings under legal supervision. As he stood, he paused next to me. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered. I looked at him, unsure if it was meant as praise or an accusation. I know I said steady and certain. 2 months after that morning in Judge Monroe's office, I sat at the head of the conference table that used to be Dad's. The nameplate now read Jessica R. Adams, Chief Executive Officer. The room was unchanged except for the framed photo of Mom I had placed behind my chair, a quiet guardian watching over everything. The transition had been framed in the press as a strategic generational shift. Headlines praised the firm's young new leader, the youngest woman in the country, to helm a top-tier financial institution. Internally, however, I was laser-focused. There were contracts to revise, relationships to repair, and legacy to protect. Dad remained on paper an honorary board member with no voting rights, his every financial action monitored by legal and forensic advisors. In exchange for avoiding prison, he agreed to quarterly reviews and signed a legally binding pledge to cooperate with asset recovery. Meanwhile, I deferred Yale for 1 year, opting to continue the intensive business immersion Judge Monroe and his network had prepared me for. I worked 15-hour days, often crashing on the office couch, fueled by caffeine and quiet fire. Cassandra, who had tried to flee to Florida weeks after disappearing, had been intercepted while attempting to access one of the shell accounts. Her charges were paused in exchange for full cooperation and forfeiture of all assets tied to the fraud. She returned to Connecticut subdued, stripped of her power, and housed in a condo owned by the firm. Her role, a glorified assistant in client services. Every phone call she made was monitored, every document reviewed. She knew better than to complain. 6 months into my new life, I made the final symbolic break from my past. I sold the house. The gardens were long gone, the warmth buried under marble counters and cold tile. I moved into a brownstone downtown, one with history and space to breathe. It didn't feel like Mom's home, but it felt like mine. Weeks later, on a cloudless Sunday, I visited the cemetery for the first time since I'd read her letter. I laid a bouquet of wildflowers at her grave and whispered, "It's safe now. I did what you asked, and I kept the promise." As I stood to leave, I saw a figure standing nearby, Valerie. Her eyes red, clutching a small bundle of white roses. She didn't approach, didn't speak, just nodded once and turned away. I let her go. That Mother's Day, I mailed her something simple, a photo of Mom laughing in her backyard surrounded by zinnias. On the back in clean script, I wrote, "Thinking of you, no return address." She never replied, but I knew she understood. Some gifts don't come wrapped in bows, some justice doesn't need a courtroom, and some endings, when carried out with precision and grace, become beginnings.